Hey guys, and welcome to my tutorial on how to set up a damageable health bar. So what I mean by that, I'll just go ahead and show you guys real quick, is that if I take some damage here, so if you look at the bottom left where my health bar is, whenever I take damage, you'll notice that the green bar, which is my health, goes down instantly, and then there's that kind of red bar that lingers behind it and kind of interpolates to the new value. So whenever I take damage, it kind of shows you briefly how much damage you're actually taking, and it kind of draws your eye to it a little bit. So we're going to be setting up this little widget here. It's actually a material that we're going to be creating along with a couple widgets. And you can use this bar for anything. It doesn't have to be health. Pretty much anything that you want to update like this, you can use it for. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into it. So I'm going to go ahead and do this from scratch like always. So I'm going to open up the Epic Game Launcher, and then we're going to be creating a new project. So I'm on engine version 4.26.1. I always recommend, if you can, to be on this version or newer when you're trying to follow along. But I think if you're on an older version, it shouldn't matter. I don't think we're doing anything too crazy. So we want to come down here to games, hit next, and then I'm using the first person template. So I'm going to select first person and then go ahead and hit next. And then I'll just call this the health bar tutorial. And then make sure you have blueprint selected. Let me move my mic real quick. Okay. Make sure you have blueprints selected and no starter content because we don't need either of those. And then go ahead and create the project. And then while that's loading, let me just move this guy. Oh, I already did move it over there. All right, perfect. So one thing we're going to need first is the texture that I used, because you'll notice, let me run my other one real quick. So if you notice, the health bar actually has a little angled edge to it. If you don't want that, then you actually don't need this texture. But if you do want that, or you want some other sort of shape for your health bar, then you'll need a texture for it. And I'll give you guys this texture in case you want to use the same one. But again, you don't need this one. You can really use whatever texture you want. So in the description of this video, there'll be a link to probably a Dropbox. And it will look like this. There'll be a T health bar TGA file. And so what we want to do is, I'm going to drag this off the screen real quick. And then back here in our content folder, let's just make a new folder and call it assets. And then inside of here, we can just take this health bar texture and drag it in like so, and then we'll go ahead and import it. And then we want to open this up. And if you're using a different texture, make sure you do this as well. We want to change the compression settings to be user interface. And we don't really want sRGBs, we can uncheck that. And then we also want to change the texture group to be UI, since we're going to be using it on the UI. And you can see this is all this is. It's just the shape of our health bar. And then there's alpha where we don't want to see anything. And so if you want to have a different shape for your health bar, then all you have to do is use a different texture. And things should work out for you just the same. Okay, so we can press save. And we can probably just close this because we don't need it anymore. So first, before we do anything else, let's go ahead and set up our material. So let's come inside, actually we are inside here. Let's right click and make a new material, and we'll just call it m underscore stacked progress bar. And the reason I'm calling it stacked progress bar is because we're going to kind of treat these different layers as stacks. So we have the green layer, which is going to be we're going to refer to that as the top layer, like the top progress bar. And then we have the red one, which is going to be the bottom one. And then that black background, which we're just going to refer to as the background. So we have the top stack progress bar, the middle stack progress bar, and the background. So that's kind of the terminology I'm going to be using. So if we open this up, we want to, first of all, click on this guy, and we want to change it to be user interface. And we also want to change the blend mode to be translucent, so that way it can have opacity to it. And then the first thing we want to do is we want to sample our texture that we just imported. So if we right click and you search for texture sample, go ahead and select this texture sample. And then we actually want to take this and convert it to a parameter, because this is basically going to be the base material or the parent material. And then you can create material instances off of this to make a whole bunch of different versions of this health bar that have different textures and different colors and all that good stuff, depending on what you need it for in your game. So we're going to make this a parameter, and we'll just call this the texture. And by the way, I just right-clicked and said convert to parameter in case you missed that. And then we want to take this and we'll just hook it up to final color right now. And then for the texture, we want to scroll down and we want to select RT underscore health bar or whichever texture you're using. And you can see we now see our texture over here. It doesn't look great. That's fine. This is just the preview window. It's not going to look great in there for right now. Okay, so like I was saying, this progress bar is made up of multiple layers. It has the background, it has the top progress bar, and it has the bottom progress bar. So what we want to do is we want to add some parameters over here. So to do that, we can just right click and or actually just hold down 1 and left click, and that will create a new scalar 1 value. I think you can get this by saying constant. Yeah, if you just right click and set your constant, it'll do the same thing. So we want to take this and convert this to a parameter as well, and we will call this the top progress, if I can spell. And we want to set the slider min to 0, which it already is, and we want to set the slider max to 1. So that's basically limiting this value between 0 and 1, since it's a progress. And then we can set the default value to something. I'll just set it to like 0.5. And then we also want 1 for the bottom progress, which is going to be that red part of it. So we'll right click, or actually we'll hold down 1 and left click, and then we'll right click on this and say convert to parameter, and we'll call it the bottom progress. And again, we want this to be from 0 to 1 over here for the min and the max. And then the default value doesn't really matter, but just for previewing purposes, we'll set it to 0.2. And then we need the, let's see, we need the background color. So actually, yeah, let's go ahead and make that one for right now. So right click again, make a constant 3 vector. And then let's right click on this and say convert to parameter. And we will call this the background color. And since this is a parameter, again, it doesn't matter what you set the default value to. It's mostly just for previewing, but we'll just go ahead and set it to white so we can see it more easily. All right, so we want to do a little bit of logic here to make the different progress bars show up. So what we're going to do is we're going to need to get access to the U coordinate of the UV coordinate. So we'll right click and say text coordinate or texture coordinate. And then we want to take this and we want to type in component mask. So it's called component mask, but when you click on it, it just says mask, which is a little bit confusing, but it's this one. We want to uncheck the G because we only care about the R, which is the U part of the UV coordinate. And we want to say, we want to do an if, drag up that, say if. And we want to say if this value is greater than our total progress plus our top progress plus our bottom progress. So we'll do an add. Then that's going to go into the B. So if it's greater, then we want to use this background color. So we will hook our background color up into there. And then otherwise, we want to either use our top color or our bottom color, because this is basically saying is the total progress bar, which includes the green part and the red part, or the top part and the bottom part, if the texture coordinate is greater than that value, that means it's past the end of the progress bar. And so we just want to go with the background color. And then these two values, we're going to hook up to what happens if this texture coordinate is actually less than that, which means it's somewhere either in the green or the red section of the progress bar. So for that, we can do something very similar. So I'm actually going to copy, let's just copy these 3 values and paste them down here. And then for B, we want to hook up our top progress. So you can actually take this top progress and copy and paste it and then hook it up into B. I will just say one little warning about doing this. If you ever come and you rename top progress up here to something else, it doesn't rename it down here. It kind of creates 2 of them. So be careful with that. Some people like to just do this instead so that you only have 1 reference here. But as long as you're not renaming things, it's totally fine to do it this way. So that's going to be our top progress going into B. And then for our greater than case, we want to use whatever color we want for the bottom progress bar. So again, let's hold down 3 and left click, and that'll create us a constant 3 vector. And then let's right click, convert to parameter, and we'll call this the bottom color. And then we will make this red by default. And then that will go into our A greater than B. And then otherwise, that means we are to the left, basically, of the red, which everything to the left of the red should be green, at least in my example before. So we will, again, hold down 3, left click, right click on this, convert to parameter, and call it top color. And then this was going to go into both of these cases. So I'm going to drag it here, and I'm just going to double click to make a little reroute node, and then also hook it into there. And then we'll default this one to be green. Oops, not green. And again, these defaults don't matter because these are parameters, so we're going to be changing them later anyways. But I'm just making them colors here so we can see it update over here on the left. And then this value is going to go into the A equals B, and also the A is less than B, like so. Okay, so it should look like this. I'll just zoom out a little bit so you guys can see it all. And what we're going to do is we're going to take this value, and we're actually going to multiply it by this guy. So we're going to say multiply this by this, and then that's going to go into our final color, like so. And so now, just to kind of give you an idea of what's going on, if we come over here to our defaults, we should probably fix this because these are kind of messy, or they're not in a very great order. So let's make the colors on top. So let's start with the top color, click on this guy. We'll set his sort priority to 0, and then the bottom color, we'll set it to 1. The background color, we'll set it to 3. And then we'll do the top progress, we'll set it to 4. And the bottom progress, we will set to 5. All right, now if we look at our parameters, they're nicely organized. I guess we should probably set the texture to 6, just so it lines up nicely here. Okay, so now we have our top, bottom, background, top progress, bottom progress, and our texture. So all these are parameters that we can modify once we create an instance of this thing. But for right now, we can just kind of move these values around so you can see what's going on. So we're basically saying that we want the top progress, which is the green part of the bar, to be 0.5% full. And so you can see if we change this to 0.1, it will significantly reduce the amount of green to be 0.1. And likewise, if we change it to 0.7, then it will fill up 70% of it. And then the bottom progress is how much of the red there is. So if we change this to 0.1, it will cut it in half. And so hopefully you can kind of get the idea of what's going on here. And we'll be changing these values through code eventually. But so let's just set them back to 0.5 and 0.2 for right now. And then obviously the colors do the same thing. You can change them and it'll update, but I'm not going to do that. And then one other thing we want to do here is we want to be able to support opacity for the background. So that way, if you want to have, well, if you want to have opacity, or sorry, if you want to have transparency on the background color here, you can do that. So in order to do that, we're going to do something very similar to what we did over here. So I think we can pretty much just copy, let's just copy all of this. We don't really need that guy though. Copy and paste. And this is going to go into the opacity. And what we want to do here is, let's see. Right, so for these two values, hold down 1 and left click, and that'll create a constant. And let's set this guy to 1, and we'll hook that into here, and we'll hook that into here. And so now you can see if we click on the default value and we change this alpha, or sorry, if we click on the background color's default value, we change the alpha to like 0.5. You can see it gives the white, that didn't work. Oh, because we need to move this guy. So move this pin down to here because we want the opacity of it. You can see now it has 50% opacity for the background color. I'm going to set this back to 1 for now. And that way, I'll just show you my other project in case you missed it. So you can see when I take damage, there's actually transparency to the background, which kind of makes it look a little bit nicer in my opinion. If you want to add transparency to the foreground, then all you would have to do is modify the render opacity of the actual widget itself. So we don't really need to support that. Okay, so now we have our material totally set up and good to go. And basically this little code right here, since I didn't really explain what it does, all it's doing is, so it's ultimately going into the opacity, and it's basically saying if the texture coordinate is greater than the top progress plus the bottom progress, which is the green plus the red, then go ahead and use the opacity of the background color. So it's basically saying anywhere that's using the background color, actually pay attention to whatever the opacity value is that was passed in. Okay, so now we have that. So now we can go and make our material instance that I was talking about. So if we come back here to our material, we can actually right click on this and say create material instance. And I'm going to call this mi for material instance underscore health bar. So the reason we're doing this should hopefully become clear here in a second. So if we open this up, you can see we have a slightly different interface here. We have all of our parameters on the left that we created earlier. So we have our bottom progress, top progress, our texture, and our background, bottom and top colors. So we can set these to be whatever we want. So for the health bar, let's see here. Let's say we want the background color to, instead of being white, let's make it like almost black. So 0.01, 0.01, 0.01, and like 0.5 for the opacity. And then for the bottom color, we want to set this, we'll just kind of modify it to something a little bit more stylistic, I guess you could say. And the top color will kind of do the same thing. Just give it a slight offset green and offset red. And then these values, the bottom progress and the top progress, we're actually going to be changing these in the blueprints, like in code, depending on what your health is. So we don't need to adjust these. We can just leave them as is. And then the texture here, I'm just going to point this out. We don't actually need to change it, but if you wanted to use this material for something else, like a different type of progress bar, like maybe your shields as well, and you had a different texture for it, like maybe your shield one had like a diamond shape into it or a circular shape into it, you could go in here and switch it out for a different one and everything would work the same. It would just be using that different texture. So I'm just going to leave this the same. I'm actually going to uncheck this because we're not going to change it. I just wanted to give you guys that ability to switch out textures if you wanted to. Okay, so this is our health bar material instance. Now that we have these created, we can actually go ahead and start creating our widgets. So let's see here. The first thing we need to do is create our HUD widget. So let's come back. Let's see. Let's come back and, well, let's start the other way around. Let's create the stacked progress bar widget first, and then we'll kind of go backwards from there. So let's go out of the assets folder. I'm going to make a new folder here and call it widgets. And then inside of here, let's create a new widget. So right click, go to user interface, and then widget blueprint. And we will call this the stacked progress bar underscore widget. And notice we're not calling this health bar widget, we're not calling this HUD widget or whatever, because this widget can be reused for all different types of stacked progress bars that you want to use in your game. So we're setting up this way so that it's reusable. So that way if you want to use it for health and shields or stamina or whatever, you can do it really easily and you can just reuse this widget wherever you want. You'll kind of see it making sense once we start adding more widgets. So this one is not going to be specific to health. It's just going to be a generic widget that updates the stacked progress bar as needed. So let's open this guy up real quick. This is where the majority of the logic and stuff is going to be. So let's go to the designer tab first, up here at the top right. We're already there. The first thing we can do is delete this canvas panel because we don't need it. And we want to add an image here. And so we'll drag in our image. And that's actually the only thing we're going to need. I'm just going to come up here and set this to desired. It doesn't really matter because this is just for previewing. But just so it's a little bit smaller, I guess. I don't know. We don't need to do that really. But the main thing we need to do is, let's see here. Actually, I think that's the only thing we need to do on this tab. We should probably name it something though. Let's rename this. Let's click on it and then F2 and call it health bar. Or we shouldn't call it health bar again because it's not specific to the health bar. So we'll call it progress bar widget, or image rather. It's an image. Okay. And so what we're going to do is we're actually going to set the brush that it's using, because you might be asking, well, why aren't we setting the brush? Because we're going to set the brush in code. And the reason we need to set it in code is because we need it to be a dynamic material instance. And the reason we need it to be a dynamic material instance is because we're going to be modifying the values inside of the material at runtime, like our progress and, well, yeah, our progress. So if we come over here to our graph tab now, you'll see we have our progress bar image on the left here. And so what we want to do in our pre-construct, so we can delete all this stuff, is we want to create the dynamic material instance for this image. and then we want to assign it to it. And the reason we're doing it inside the pre-construct is so it will actually run in the editor. If you don't do it inside the pre-construct, then you won't be able to see it on the designer tab. And you'll see what I mean here in a little bit once we make the other widget. So we can say get progress bar image. Oh, we forgot one thing. Before we do that, we need to add a variable for the material instance that we want to create. So over here on the left, make a new variable and call it material instance. And then for the type of it, we want to set it to material instance, like so. And we want object reference here. And then we want to make sure we set it to instance editable, blueprint read only, and private. And the reason we're setting it to instance editable is because whenever somebody creates an instance of one of these widgets on another widget, they want to be able to specify which material instance, in this case, this guy, that it's going to be rendering. So now that we have that being passed in, we can take this and say get, and we want to drag off this and say create material or create dynamic material instance. And again, the reason we're creating a dynamic one is so that we can modify the values of it at runtime. So let's hook that up. And we're basically just saying, hey, this is the parent value for it. And then we want to take this and right click and say promote to variable. And then we're going to call this the dynamic material instance. And then I'm going to come up here because I like to do this and say show access specifier. And that will add public or private in front of the variables, just so we can see what they are. This one we also want to make private, so it's like private down here. And then the last thing we want to do in the pre-construct is we want to set the brush. So like I was saying before, we can drag in our progress bar image, and we'll say set brush from material. And then the material is going to be this guy. Now, if we compile and we save and go back to our designer tab, you'll notice it doesn't actually change, and that's because we don't have a default value here for our material instance. So if we come down here, we can just select one so we can see it working. So let's select our mi underscore health bar, and then compile, save, go back to the designer tab, and you can see we have something showing up that kind of looks like our health bar. Obviously, it's not the right size, but that's fine because, again, this is just a generic widget that does whatever it needs to do in order to update this thing. The actual size of it is going to vary depending on like which texture you're using. So the size of it is going to be defined in a different widget, whichever widget happens to use this one. So don't worry about the size being wrong for right now because it doesn't actually matter. Okay, the next thing we want to do is let's create our health widget. So come back here, right click again, say user interface, widget blueprint, and we'll call this the health underscore widget. And this guy, let's open this up. And so inside of here, we're going to create the health bar, and then we're going to create the little text to the right of it that shows how much health you have. And so the cool thing about having our stacked progress bar widget inside of its own widget is that we can just drag it into this one. So it's really simple. So before we do that, let's just delete this canvas panel again because we don't need it. We really just want to have a horizontal box here. So we'll drag one of those in. And then we can drag in our stacked progress bar. So we'll say stacked progress bar widget. Then we can go ahead and just drag this directly onto our horizontal box. And then again, let's come up here and change this to desired so we can see what it actually is going to look like. And there we go. So we just have a horizontal box with our stacked progress bar widget inside of it. So this is what I was saying before about it being the wrong size. In order to fix that, we can just take this and wrap it with a size box, and we can set it to whatever size we want. So for the size box, we want to, first of all, we want to set this to center and center, so that way it actually stays this size. And then for the width and the height override, we can check both of these. And then to figure out what numbers you should put here, you can go back to your texture, your health bar texture. And if you look at it, it says imported size is 300 by 26. So we want to set it to 300 by 26. That way it matches the texture that it's trying to render. So we'll say 300 by 26. Okay, there we go. And then why is this showing black here? Oh, I know why. It's because we didn't actually, we need to go back to our m underscore stacked progress bar real quick. We forgot to multiply in the opacity of this original texture. So I actually want to take this opacity value and say multiply. and we want to multiply it by this opacity here. And that will make sure that we actually include the opacity of this texture that we're using. So now if we hit apply and save, and then we go back to our health bar, you can see now it's looking more like we'd expect over here on the left. There's no black. Okay. Alrighty. So the next thing we want to do is add the text over here on the right, which is going to represent the actual health. So we'll say text, and then drag that onto the horizontal box. And then for this guy, let's go ahead and let's change the font family to Roboto Tiny, just so it's a little smaller. And then we'll say like 16 maybe for the text size. One thing you should check here, if you change this to like, 26, you want to make sure that the size of this guy doesn't actually change. Like it's not changed right now. You'll see if I go like 30, it's just moving it, but it doesn't actually change the size of it, which is really important because otherwise it's going to mess up your resolution. If it is changing the size of it, then make sure on your size box you have it set up like this, where it's auto centered. Okay, so the text box, we'll just set like 1,000 here, just kind of as an example thing. And then for the padding, we'll say the left is like 5, just so it's not right up against it. And then let's also set this to be centered here, so that way it's a little bit more lined up. All right, so now we have our health bar set up. And then the last widget we need to create is our HUD. And then after that, we can just write the code to actually update this progress bar based on your health. So actually, let's do that in part 2. So I'll see you guys in part 2.